let me tell you a little bit about myself to begin with, because my own lived experiences of having a career in law is what really inspired me to create this session. So I studied law at Warwick, which is obviously up the road from, or down the road from, Birmingham, and I secured a training contract with Linklaters in my penultimate year and joined them as a trainee and then qualified into their corporate practice. I carried on working as a qualified solicitor until I was reaching 3 years of post-qualified experience and decided that it was a classic case of square peg, round hole, and quit law to become a journalist. And that then ended up with me setting up my own consultancy, which is now in its 10th year. So I am ancient, and though the process of applying for traineeships or qualifying work experience is slightly different in that you now have more information available to you than ever before, the types of questions that firms are likely to ask you are really not that dissimilar to the process I had to go through in terms of interviews, assessment centres, group exercises, case studies, etc., etc. And the reason I wanted to talk about research is I've spent the past, dare I say, 20 years talking to aspiring solicitors and barristers. And what really shocks me is how little they actually understand about the profession, okay? And this is really important for two reasons. Firstly, how can you make a decision about which pathway to pursue if you don't actually know what being a lawyer involves? And then secondly, if you adopt a scattergun approach to applications and you exercise a mudslinging sort of process where you hope that something will eventually stick, your conversion rate from application to TC interviews or VACSCUM interviews is going to be quite low, okay? Because for me, the more you learn about the profession, the digger you deep into the types of firms you want to apply to, the more precise your matching process will be, and you'll find that you have a greater success rate in terms of interview invites, okay? And that's where I let myself down, I guess. I wasn't really sure how to research firms. I sort of muddled along with, nicely. I was lucky enough to be at a university that was targeted quite heavily by employers. So I attended a few events, but mostly I just followed the crowd. And I suspect that's how I ended up at the wrong law firm and in the wrong profession, okay? So again, just to stress the importance of research, it's really, key that you develop a deeper and meaningful understanding of the sector, because that will then enable you to determine whether or not a career in law is right for you in the first instance. Because don't forget, a law degree doesn't necessarily mean that you have to pursue a legal career. Similarly, there are now so many different pathways available to you. You can, firstly decide, I think, whether you want to work in the commercial space like I did, or whether you want to go down the sort of high street, sort of family law, probate, wills, etc., that route. Because one thing I've learned now is that they are almost two separate professions in their own right. And then, of course, you've also got the solicitor versus barrister route. And one of the reasons why this is now more important than ever before is the SQE route into qualifying as a solicitor has made the process a lot more flexible. Whereas historically you would do a training contract, which would last for 2 years. Now what you can, and that would be with the same employer. Now what you do is qualifying work experience, which can be either a training contract, or it could cover paralegaling, volunteering in a legal advice centre. It could be a placement year on a sandwich degree. So, but that flexibility also means it can be a little bit more confusing. And the other really important point to highlight here is, whereas before you kind of think about qualification as you enter the final stages of your training contract, now what you need to do is really visualize where you want to be at the end of your training contract, so that the qualifying work experience you gain, so those 2 years, which will be spread across up to 4 different placements, have a tangible sort of relevance to where you want to end up. So there's absolutely no point in spending 2 years gaining qualifying work experience in the public sector if you want to do what I did, which was to do, you know, big ticket mergers and takeovers. Okay, so that matching process is more important than ever before. Okay, meaning that, you know, it's really critical that you do your research and your homework so that you get a clearer understanding of the different areas of law you can specialize in, because it can really differ in terms of what your day-to-day responsibilities will be, whether you get to work in teams or whether you work individually on your own, what sort of clients you work for, etc. Okay, and as I've said already, by knowing how to research firms, you know, where to look for, what to look for, you'll use a far more sophisticated method of comparing firms beyond how big they are or how they structure their training contracts, because that's quite basic stuff. Because I've had quite a lot of trainees say to me, or future trainees say to me, I want to join your firm because you only take on 5 trainees per year. And I'm like, well, you know, that's a good start, but what else do you know about my firm? So it's really important to be able to discuss with the interviewers in a little bit more detail. And so let's start by what to look for, okay, beyond the size of the trainee intake or how big a firm is, okay, because size, as they say, you know, isn't everything. Okay, because I remember when I was applying for training contracts, I decided I want to work for the biggest law firm in the world and applied to Pivot a Chance, where I did get a VAC scheme, by the way, but didn't get a training contract, which is why I ended up at Linklaters. Anyway, so look at numbers are important, though, that being said. But, you know, so look at things like headcount, number of offices, and that can be gleaned from year-end results. So thankfully, my former employer, the Lawyer magazine, where I spent 10 years, you know, publishes lots of information about how well a firm is performing in terms of its revenue, profits, etc., etc. Okay, and the reason why these numbers are interesting is that it will give you an idea of what your target firms see as priorities. You know, are they trying to grow in a particular jurisdiction? Are they looking for a US merger? Are they trying to grow a particular practice area? Because that will, again, help you to give a far more robust response to what it is that has attracted you to that firm in the first instance. Okay. Another differentiator, of course, is the key practice areas. You've got, you know, most law firms will be split by practice areas. Okay, so you will be, you know, a corporate lawyer, a banking lawyer, a financial services regulatory lawyer, competition, employment, etc. And that also applies for smaller high street firms as well. Okay, but what about star partners? So who are the ones that are really making a splash at the firm that they are a partner? You know, who are their target clients? Okay, and then of course recent work. You know, what are their major pieces of work that they've been involved in? Have they recently advised on a high-profile M&A deal? Have they recently been involved in a successful case that has been in the High Court? Okay, and then finally, another important consideration is, you know, what would it be like to work for that firm? You know, what are its values? What sort of culture prevails? And the clues there will be, you know, the people and, you know, what are their backgrounds? You know, has that firm got lots of former Birmingham students, for example? What about commitments to areas such as, you know, diversity, equality and inclusion, pro bono, you know, climate change? You know, what are their green credentials? Okay, and that to me is a better way of looking at culture, because quite a lot of students say to me, because how do you know what it would be like to work for a firm? How can you define culture a bit more precisely? It's by looking at these areas. Okay, if a firm, you know, is always making waves in terms of diversity and inclusivity, then, and that's important to you because you're a student from a diverse background, whether that's ethnicity, disability, sexuality, etc., then that could be a potential, you know, reason for you to target that firm. Before I go on to where to look for the information, I thought it would be helpful just to cover off some jargon, because when I was researching law firms, I only understood about 80% of what they were saying, because there was always lots of, you know, buzzwords that they would use, particularly when you look beyond the trainee recruitment literature. Okay, so some of the keywords to look out for, and by the way, there is a jargon buster on my website, which is called cheaplittlecareers.com, which you can access for free. But associate and counsel are essentially the names given to someone who is a qualified lawyer. Okay, so the way the pecking order works is you join as a trainee solicitor, then you become an associate, then you become a senior associate, then you can either become a counsel or an of counsel or a partner. Okay, billable and chargeable hours are a really interesting factor, number to look at, because as you know, as a lawyer, you earn your living through doing work for your clients, which you can charge either at an hourly rate or at a fixed rate. Okay, but what law firms will do is set targets or as to how many hours per year you should be working for a client and earning money for the business. Okay, and that is very, very revealing as to whether or not a law firm is likely to be a sweatshop. Okay, because let's be brutally honest, right? When law firms come and do presentations to you, they're usually on sell mode. So they're hardly going to say that if you come to our firm, you're going to be working ridiculously long hours. Okay, so I want you to be able to figure this out for yourself. And billable hours targets can range from 1,400 to 2,200. You do the maths, work it out for yourselves. Okay, and there's a reason why law firms pay six-figure salaries to their newly qualified solicitors. Okay. Now, an equity partner and a salary partner are slightly different. So the vast majority of law firms, with the exception of a handful that are listed on the stock exchange, so they're public companies, are structured as partnerships. Okay, so for those of you who see yourselves as career lawyers who want to have a long-term sort of sell-by date in the profession, then you should be working towards becoming an equity partner. It basically means that you've got a share in the business and that your earnings per year will be, derived from whatever's left in the profit pot. Okay. Now, a salaried partner is basically a label that's given to a senior associate in recognition of the fact that they're working towards becoming a member of the equity. And also it gives you a bit more kudos when you're pitching clients, work to clients. But ultimately a salaried partner still earns a fixed share, a salary, as the name would suggest. Now, a fee earner is the phrase used to describe anyone within a law firm who basically can be billed out to a client. You've got to use this word with a bit more sensitivity now, because historically a fee earner was always either a lawyer, a lawyer, so a solicitor, or a trainee solicitor, or a paralegal. Okay, but as law firms are becoming more diverse in terms of the services they offer law firms, there are now quite a lot of other specialists within a law firm umbrella who are also billed out to clients. Okay, so just be mindful of the fact that this is now a broader definition that extends beyond someone who is a qualified solicitor or a paralegal or trainee. Now, lockstep is a useful phrase to understand the meaning of as well. It's essentially a ladder. So law is quite an unusual profession because your salary is ultimately determined by how many years you've been qualified. So the phrase to describe that is known as post-qualified experience, or PQE. Okay, and essentially on qualification, you'd be a newly qualified solicitor or an NQ, as highlighted in my slide. And then as you gain your experience, you move up the associate lockstep. And as for every year you're qualified, you move up the ladder and your salary is usually automatic up until you get to about mid-associate level. And then there's a little bit more meritocracy based on appraisal grades, et cetera, okay? But and that's why in some ways in law it's quite useful, because there's a lot of transparency as to how much associates earn, because it's based entirely, well, your base salary, which excludes potential bonuses, is based entirely on how many years of qualification you've gained under your belt. So PEP stands for profit per equity partner. So that's essentially the share of the profit that each equity partner will take home once everything else is paid off. And then a rainmaker, I mentioned in my previous slide, star partners. Rainmaker is essentially a star partner who is, the person bringing in the big ticket mandates, okay? So when you're researching star partners, if you want to really impress, you can refer to them as a rainmaker. Why does this all matter? It's pretty simple, really. You're not going to be able to get into a commercial law firm, or indeed any law firm, without being able to answer some pretty basic questions, okay? So the one that comes up again and again and again, and this will be at both application form stage and interview stage, is why commercial law, okay? And you're not going to be able to answer that until you fully understand how a career as a commercial lawyer will differ to one who works in a high street firm. So I'll give you some examples here. The work is more fast-paced. Your clients are more sophisticated because you'll be advising, you know, entrepreneurs, directors of FTSE 100 companies, private equity specialists, etc. Okay, and that's very different to advising someone like me who had a trip yesterday and who might want to sue the business or the local authority for a loose pavement. Okay, so ultimately it's a personal choice as to whether you want to be advising, you know, individuals who live local to where your law firm is based, or whether you want to go international and advise sophisticated business people on deals that are likely to be in the news. Okay. The other questions that come up will be, why our firm? Now, can you see where I'm going with this? If you've done your homework, you should be able to come up with, I would suggest, 3 reasons as to why that particular firm is on your shortlist. Okay. And you need to go one better. You also need to be able to explain why their firm is different. How does it differentiate itself from its competitors? And that's where culture might come in. That's where key clients might come in, or key practice areas, okay? And then there is also a chance, a very high chance, that you may get asked questions that test your commercial awareness. And that might include something on the lines of, what do you see as the key risks and opportunities for the legal sector in the next 5 years? Or where do you see the legal sector in 5 years? Okay. And the problem with commercial awareness, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because this isn't a commercial awareness workshop or webinar even, but lots of students often make throwaway remarks about a news story that's piqued their interest, okay? Or they might use a buzzword like the cost of living crisis, or the war in Ukraine, or Brexit, right? But what they don't appreciate is how some of these headlines are linked to the legal sector. What impact are they having on the law firm you're sat in front of? You know, is this story likely to keep the partners you're being interviewed by awake at night, or will it keep their clients awake at night? Okay, and remember, it's risks and opportunities. Okay, so let's look at how you're going to go about doing your research. And there are lots of different ways of doing this. Historically, it was predominantly desk-based, and there is still, you know, a lot to be said about looking at law firm websites, but not just their early talent pages, okay, where you'll find that it's very salesy. You know, they'll go on about how amazing their culture is, and they'll profile a few trainees, okay. To develop a sophisticated understanding of your target law firms, do look at their press releases, go into their client hubs where the partners might be writing, you know, thought leadership pieces on, you know, a new piece of legislation that's going to have, you know, a bit of a a big bang effect on the industry that they advise mostly in, okay? So follow them on social media, but again, you know, of course, follow their early talent page on Instagram, but I really usually be following their corporate feeds instead, because that's where you'll get the breaking news stories, you'll get the client alerts. And, you know, don't worry if you don't understand all of this from the outset, because law is full of jargon. And even if you can develop a decent understanding of what law firms are doing, that's going to be a lot better than not understanding anything, okay? But take it bit by bit and make it into a habit, and you'll find that you become a lot better at having an intelligent discussion with interviewers about the legal industry and about their firm, okay? Directories and newspapers and websites are also a great fountain of knowledge. So directories, the main ones are Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners, and they come up, what they'll do is show you how a law firm is ranked in a particular practice area. My next slide is going to cover rankings, so I'll park that for a moment. But the legal press is also very helpful. So you've got The Lawyer, you've got law.com, and you've got Roll on Friday and Legal Cheek. Okay, I'd be very, the Legal Cheek for me is quite gossipy, and I'm not entirely sure how much they are going to help you to develop a sophisticated understanding of the legal industry, okay? But of course there is, usually quite a lot of trainee focused news there. So use it as a starting point, but put it this way, okay? I'm going to sound like your middle-aged aunt right now, but I don't care. If you think that you're going to develop a decent understanding of the legal industry by watching stupid TikTok videos, forget it, okay? I know that your generation is really into that sort of stuff, but the legal industry is conservative with a small c, okay? What they want are people who can take life a little bit more seriously, okay? And again, if that doesn't excite you, then you need to ask yourself whether you actually should be pursuing a career as a lawyer. There you go, lecture over. But the sort of stories you should be looking out for are those linked to partner hires, key deals that a firm has advised on, a client win, it could be redundancies, it could be salary hikes, it could be stories about D&I initiatives, etc. All of that is going to be far more relevant than a student getting, hot under the collar because they posted a, inappropriate tweet, right? Okay. So yeah, social media has a place, and I don't want you to lead a life that's so dull. A bit of, frivolity is not a bad thing because it keeps us sane, but try to take a little bit more of a serious approach to news consumption is all I'm saying. Let's look at law firm rankings in a bit more detail. Oh, sorry, there you go. So law firm rankings, the key here is that in Legal 500 and Chambers, the big commercial law firms are ranked by practice areas and also by the different jurisdictions they operate in, okay? And let's use the magic circle as an example. If you looked up Linklaters on Legal 500 or Chambers and Partners, you'll find that they are highly ranked in quite a large number of practice areas, which is why they're in the magic circle, okay? Because the magic circle is essentially a group of elite law firms comprising Linklaters, Freshfields, Allen & Overy, Clifford Chance, and Slaughters, if you Slaughter May, okay? And the reason they're elite is because they've got very high rankings across the board, okay? That being said, a high ranking in its own right isn't enough, because let's say, for example, your heart is set on becoming an IP lawyer, right? If you applied to Linklaters and said, I want to join Linklaters because I'm really interested in IP, you may not go, your application may risk being rejected. And the reason being, even though Linklaters is ranked pretty highly in IP, it's not a target practice area. So what you need to do is look at what percentage of a firm's revenue is derived from each practice area, okay? So where a firm is ranked really highly, so let's say ranked in tier 1 or 2 in corporate, and the lion's share of that firm's revenue comes from work that it does in its corporate team, then you know that firm is going to be pretty well regarded in corporate, and it's going to be, a practice area that is significant for the firm. So if you, let's use private equity, for example. Let's say you want to apply to Kirkland & Ellis, which is very well known for private equity, and its London office is predominantly a private equity firm. If you apply to them for a training contract and say that, you know, you're interested in their firm because you see yourself as a future private equity lawyer, that's a pretty good match for you, and you will make some decent inroads into getting an interview with that firm. Okay, but it's not just enough to say you want to do private equity. You need to then explain why private equity appeals to you. Okay, so that's how you use the rankings. And then another point that's also worthwhile remembering is that if you decide that you want to be a private equity lawyer, then it makes sense for you to apply to all the peer firms that are also well known in private equity. So let's say you've decided that you want to work for a US law firm that does a lot of private equity in London. Remember, you need to be able to explain why you want to be a private equity lawyer. But then what you should be doing then really is applying to as many firms in band 1 for private equity as possible, you know, or certainly have them in your hit list to go off and do a bit more research, okay? Because you'll find that, you know, I often get asked by students, how many applications should I be making? And I don't have a number, but there is a bit of a numbers game. And if you needed to work out how many to apply to, then the question you should be asking yourself is, have I covered all the competitors? And you'll find also that you will be able to regurgitate some of the content of your answers, because private equity is private equity, if that makes sense. So you need to do obviously some tailoring, but there will be a little bit of duplication in your applications. Let's look at financial results in the news. Okay, so I've covered this a little bit already. Headcount is really important because that will obviously give you an idea of, you know, for me, I wanted to be in a big law firm with lots of trainees because I felt that it would be a good way to meet lots of people and develop a network of friends, because I was going to be fresh moving to London. Okay, but you may find that some of you will do a lot better working in a smaller environment. You know, it's that classic big, you know, small fish, big pond versus, you know, small pond, big fish sort of setup. The bigger the firm, you'll find the more, you know, the greater choice there is in terms of practice areas. And you also find that if they've got lots of overseas offices, then you may have a stronger chance of getting an overseas secondment if that's important to you. Okay. The other one is looking at revenue or indeed profit and how that's split between different offices and practice areas. Remember what I said, that just because a firm is really reputable in one area, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a strategic priority for that firm and that's where they're investing a lot of money. But looking at how many partners operate in that practice area and how much of the fees generated by the firm can be attributable to that practice area is a better way of looking at it. It's also important to look at a law firm's financial health, okay? So look at office launches, closures, partner hires, partner exits, retention rates for newly qualified solicitors, salary increases, and freezes. And this year is going to be ever so important when looking at the financial health of law firms, because I know we're not technically in recession, and the word recession keeps teasing us because one minute we might be in it, next we're not. No one really knows what's going to happen because the economic news coming out now seems to be a little bit more optimistic. But it'll be interesting to see if we do result in the economy going into recession, how law firms fare in terms of a potential contraction in the economy. By the way, I've been working in the legal sector now for over 20 years. And just to reassure you, the legal sector is pretty resilient in the, you know, when there's an economic downturn, because as they say, you know, you will always need a lawyer. When things are going well, you need a lawyer. When things are going badly, you'll need a lawyer. And in my time working in the legal industry, I've seen 3 law firms collapse, like 3 high-profile law firms collapse, which is nothing when you look at, for example, how many retailers have gone under in recent years. Okay, and you'll hear the phrase counter-cyclical, that law is counter-cyclical. Not all areas of law are counter-cyclical. Now, another top tip when it comes to commercial awareness is when you're looking at looking at the economy and what that means for law firms, the reason why interest rates are really important is because transactional practice areas like corporate, banking, finance, they're very, very, very heavily driven by the availability of credit, i.e. how easy is it for your client to borrow money, okay? And of course, interest rates will have a massive impact on how readily available borrowings are. And in some instances, and this is where some firms are reporting a slowdown in deals, some deals have become, some deals are no longer viable because the amount it would cost for the client to borrow to buy the target company is now prohibitively expensive. I've mentioned desk-based research. The other key source of information, of course, is employer events. Now, Birmingham is a bit of a target, particularly for commercial law firms. So if you do get the opportunity to attend events that are being hosted by employers, then it's certainly worth going along. I used to go simply for the free food, but and I'm pretty sure some of my fellow students do the same thing. But if you do go along, you'll learn a lot more about how the law firm recruits, the training contract structure, the culture. If you get to meet some of the trainees, you can form your own opinion on whether you see them as potential future colleagues. But it's worth noting that when law firms come to do presentations on campus, they are on message because they're in sell mode. So as I said earlier on this afternoon, they're unlikely to tell you that their firm is a sweatshop. They may well say, be expected to work hard, and these are the sorts of clients we work for. But, make sure when you go to these events that you ask appropriate questions. So this is another dig I'm going to have at students, right? I've spoken at so many events, spanning 2 decades, speaking to students, and it shocks me how woefully unprepared or ill-prepared students are when it comes to asking questions, okay? Because the information you glean is only going to be as good as the questions you ask, okay? And remember, you need to ask the appropriate question based on whether you're speaking to a trainee, someone from the HR team, or to a partner, okay? Asking a partner, what the assessment centre entails, most partners don't actually know. Asking a partner about a recent deal they've been involved in, ticked. Okay, so you've got the employer events. Then, of course, you've got networking and one-to-one meetings. You may turn around and say to me, I can't network because I don't know anyone of significance, or I can't network because I'm really, I'm a bit of an introvert and I find it quite awkward approaching strangers. Let me dispel some myths about networking. Firstly, it's not about selling. It's not, the preserve of people who are really confident. In fact, introverts can be pretty good at networking because it's also about listening and being curious. And it's not all about going to events. You can network using social media, send a cheeky connection request to a former Birmingham student. LinkedIn has given students unprecedented access to the legal profession, okay? And I probably will get shouted at for telling you to do this, but I don't see any harm in sending 1 or 2 unsolicited connection requests to people who are clearly very active on LinkedIn and who hold themselves out as being open to building their network and see themselves as being potential mentors to future lawyers, okay? So the clue is in what the individual you're about to connect with is posting on social media, okay, and how active they are. If they've got lots of followers, then it's likely that they will accept requests from everyone. And the problem with that, though, of course, is there's the balance, because if they are connected with so many people, are you likely to be able to then engage with that individual on a one-to-one basis? because networking for me is really about cultivating meaningful one-to-one relationships with targeted groups of individuals who can act as sort of future mentors for you. Okay, there are loads of mentoring programs that exist within the legal industry. There may well be some that your own university has created, but for me, some of the most important mentor-mentee relationships are those that you build organically through your own endeavors. Okay, because for me, where there's a degree of natural chemistry between you and your mentor, that can work wonders in terms of having someone to lean on for help and support. So firstly, if you are going to networking events, remember, keep it short and brief. Okay, most people don't like it if you decide to ambush them and monopolize them for the rest of the evening. Okay, because everyone has got their own agenda and wants to meet with as many people as possible. Okay, it's really about converting that initial encounter into a one-to-one meeting, and that can be virtual. It doesn't have to be an in-person meeting. Make it as easy as possible for the person you want to speak to. Okay, and that's when you can do a little bit more of a deep dive onto, you know, into a specific topic. And the most common one, of course, is getting the lawyer to talk about their own experiences of breaking into the profession. Okay, and remember what I said about asking appropriate questions. Go for open questions that start with "tell me about," "can you explain," "how," "what," "where," rather than closed questions, which will potentially risk generating one-word answers. I wanted to mention a couple of things to help move the conversation on networking forward further. So there's a method known as reveal. This isn't something I've come up with. I think it's used quite widely by grad rec professionals, but it stands for essentially recap, explore, vision, excellence, actions, and linked. Okay, the idea being that you should always approach a networking conversation ready with a interesting explanation about who you are. Okay, now I'm in two minds about elevator pitches, and you know, for me it's really as simple as who you are, where you're studying, and then, you know, handing the baton to the person you've met, because when they tell you a little bit about themselves, you can then, you know, come up with a response where there's a bit of overlap in terms of interests, or it could be that the other person, you know, has the same sort of heritage as you, or an interest in, I don't know, sailing or rugby. And remember what I said about open questions. Okay, it's all about being curious. And one of the key sort of, I get asked, you know, about being the most interesting person in the room, and one of the best ways of being the most interesting person is actually to be interested in others. Okay, but don't go to the extreme where all you do is fire lots of questions at the other person, because remember, it's a conversation, not an interrogation. Okay, and the vision piece, of course, it's about, you know, the whole purpose of these conversations is to enhance your understanding of the sector, okay, and the target firms that you're going to be potentially applying to. Okay, and a common question that lands very well with people you're going to meet will be the classic, what do you see as the, you know, common attributes of the successful trainees at your firm? Okay, because that will give you a clue as to what is their priority, and that might give you an idea of what you need to be focusing on going forward, i.e. action. Okay, so another classic question you could ask your contact would be, you know, if you were me, what actions or positive steps should I be taking next to help me, you know, pursue my ambition of becoming a solicitor? And finally, remember to ask about sending a connection request on LinkedIn. The other thing, of course, you can also do is grow your network by asking the person you've met and gotten to know to link you to someone they know. Okay, because at your stage as students, at the moment, your focus is going to be building your network. But at some point, remember, it's not just a popularity contest. It's also about staying in regular contact with the people who are going to be the most important relationships in your professional lives. Okay. A couple of more points that I wanted to cover before we open up the floor to questions. Informational interviews, okay? So you can feel free to take a screen grab of this slide. These are like the classic open questions you can ask people when you meet them at networking events or at your one-to-one coffees or virtual meetups, okay? And the idea about informational interviews is that it enables you to determine whether a career in law is right for you or a career in a particular area of law is right for you, okay? I don't need to explain what these questions are because they're pretty self-explanatory.